Hello, my name is Maury. I'm here with my husband Jim, and welcome to AI in Action. We have a guest today. His name is Chris Strahl. Chris is with Knapsack. And Chris, thank you so much for being on. I would love it if you would take just a minute and tell us just a little bit about yourself. And then we have some questions that we're going to ask you about the company and some of the stuff that you guys are doing.
Sure. So my name's Chris. I live in Portland, Oregon. I've been here like a shocking amount of time, actually, working in tech and startups. I'm what's described as a startup addict by most of my friends, my spouse, the people I interact with. This is my third startup company, but my first one on like the true venture track. And so, yeah, I'm the CEO and co-founder of a Knapsack company. And so we develop a SaaS platform and an AI tool for helping people modernize the way they build product. So most of the customers we work with are big organizations, places like big healthcare, retail, large enterprise companies that probably many of you interact with every day.
Okay. All right. So, Jim, you were looking at his product description. Do you have a couple of questions?
Yeah, I really don't understand it that well. That was my first question. So, yeah,
Gotcha.
I,
Yeah,
I
it's a
wouldn't.
common thing.
I wasn't looking for you to give me like a full PhD kind of thing, but I would at least like to understand it kind of at a high level. Understand kind of what it is and what's it for? What's your target?
Yeah, so we originally got started in a concept called design systems. And so design systems are all about the aggregation of design data and code data that you use to build products. And so, it answers the question like, what is a button? What is an accordion? What is a hero? What is a nav? And it codifies that around design and code. And so what those things mean in Figma are different than what they mean in an actual implementation. And a large part of the design systems concept is trying to figure out how you unify what you mean when you're designing a thing versus what you mean when you're actually like shipping that thing into a product. And so that's since evolved a little bit. And so we still do a lot of that, but there's a lot more sources of truth about what a product is than just what exists inside of a Git repository or what exists inside of a Figma file. There's a lot of things we use to plan a product, things like Jira or various UX research tools. There's lots of stuff that we use to test a product, various QA tools, linters, etc. And there's also lots of things that we use that are representative of compliance or things that we need to do with a product once it's out there to make sure that it meets our standards. And that's stuff like WCAG accessibility checkers or product data about its actual like conversion use inside of something like a Google Analytics tool or something like that. And so what Knapsack does is we look at all these different sources of product information and we aggregate them and we build a bunch of artifacts around those things. One of those artifacts is a design system where you can go around and browse your code base, browse your design files and understand how these things behave. But another thing is like, what is a report around accessibility? Like, where are your accessibility gaps in your products? Where are your accessibility gaps in your central systems? And so these artifacts get built, and then we serve all that up as context into various different agent systems like Claude Code or Cursor or whatever that empower people to build better products using that data and information that we create.
Okay. So, we are an AI podcast and we talk a lot about AI in education. So, could you give me an example of like a product or something that has an educational bent that you guys have like helped with?
Sure. So if you think about lots of educational systems, we work with companies like College Board or we work with like major universities. And what those folks have is they have a need to have like a brand that is representative of who they are as a business that ultimately shows up in all of the different products that exist across their ecosystem. And so using Knapsack, you'd be able to ask, hey, where do I have brand inconsistencies? Where is it that my university or College Board or whomever is not properly expressing their brand across my entire product ecosystem? And it would surface those things and then also be like, hey, using your aggregate product knowledge about the way you've expressed your brand in Figma, the way your brand is expressed in other different products that you have, would you like us to either recommend or make changes to that? And so the actual changes in the creation of that code, that's done in an LLM like Claude or OpenAI or something like that. But the context for what needs to change and what is actually truth about the way that brand should be operating, that's all data that's stored in Knapsack.
So recently, as you probably well know, I think $254 billion got wiped out of the value of SaaS companies. You said yourself you're a SaaS company. And the the context of the wipeout was, what are they really needed when you start talking about things like Cloud Code?
Mhm.
And when you're starting to talk about, aggregation of information or analyzing code bases, I do the same thing with Cloud Code where, because I write educational stuff mostly for the school district I work for. So how is it that you're different? I mean, is there a human in the loop piece that you feel like is differentiates you from Claude Code or any other of the AI tools out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's really two sources of differentiation that are still pretty durable. One of those is access to and ability to make sense of some sort of raw data, right? And so that ability to pull in that data, to normalize it, to surface it in the right moment, there's some places there that there's still like this like really kind of sustainable differentiator. And the other is how do you attach workflow to it? And so how do you have that data get surfaced in the right moment? So like you said, you have that human in the loop. That person has all the data they need in order to make an informed decision. And so when you think about something like Knapsack, we do a lot of that across all of the different places where product data lives. So product data lives in Figma, it lives in Git, it lives in Jira, it lives in all these different places. The ability to aggregate and then surface that data with the right insight in the right moment is what our sort of like AI focus is. And so that takes us from being a company that's just a SaaS provider to being much more of like an AI company. And so if you're using Claude Code and that's connected to Knapsack, one of the values that we provide is the ability to say, like, what context actually matters here, right? And how do I do things like resolve source conflicts? So you would have Knapsack connected to Figma, you'd have it Knapsack connected to your Git repository, and then through a UI, you can define which overrides what and what choices that I actually want to make about this data. So if, for example, I have a question about my brand color, right? Let's take something like stupidly simple. Is my brand color red or is it blue? And so Figma says your primary brand color is red. GitHub says your primary brand color is blue. Knapsack provides a basis for conflict resolution of that. And of course, like that's a silly example because an LLM is smart enough to just ask you, like, do you want red or blue? But the idea of how do you actually have that aggregate data in the back end and then are able to make informed choices about how that context gets used in a generation, that's really powerful.
Okay, so first of all, Chris, I've been an educator for a long time, and there's no such thing as a silly example or a silly question. I just got to say that. And you guys, so far, y'all been like really over my head with this conversation.
Okay, but I had one more question before we move on to
o-
yours.
okay, go ahead.
You mentioned mediator of conflict. Is an AI the mediator or is a human the mediator?
Yeah, so a human defines the rule set, right? And so we very much leaned into the concepts of things like compound engineering, where the role of most people now is to design the systems that AI works within, not necessarily to define the features explicitly themselves. It's the same idea of like, if you think about a startup company, right? And you say like, "Hey, me as CEO, can I be involved in every single decision that happens in the company?" No, because that doesn't scale. Like we'll never get bigger and we'll never grow. Can I define a set of guiding principles or commander's intent for the company that ultimately people can work within as a series of core values, as a set of ideas of like who we are culturally that help define the context for how we make decisions? Absolutely. And that's how you scale. And I think that it's going to be kind of the same way with a lot of these agents that exist, is you're going to have a ton of context data and you're going to want to like very specifically define some things. But then there's going to be a lot of this stuff where the responsibility of humans is defining the principles or the systems with which the AI uses to make decisions.
Right, right. That's kind of leading into the next. You mentioned that the guiding principles and the guardrails and stuff like that. So one of the things that Jim and I are doing is we talk at universities and at schools. And as a matter of fact, we're at a university tomorrow and we're going to be talking to a group of college students. So that kind of leads to the next question that I had, and that was that what advice when it comes to like, okay, I'm going to go to college and I'm going to get a degree in computer science. We have our daughter has a degree in computer science, and our youngest son is a senior, only has a semester left, and he'll be done with computer science. And because of all the stuff that's happening with artificial intelligence, we're like, oh, was this a good decision? I mean, was this something they really should have done, or that we should have, put our money into? So, what advice do you have for those kids in high school or in college that are about to be entering into this workforce? where used to, I did everything in GitHub or I did everything in Figma, and then nobody like helped me with this, but now I have a helper.
Yeah, there's a real like need to index around the creation of two things. How you take the principles you learn in software engineering and apply them to systems that you may or may not have direct control over. And then the second side of it is like indexing for, I like to call it taste, not skill. The ability to define like the right Excel function used to be a major differentiator of people in the workforce. Like, I know how to make spreadsheets dance more than everybody else knows how to make spreadsheets dance. Like, nowadays, that's not really something that is like a big problem inside of businesses. Likewise, the ability to write the right JavaScript function or whatnot is maybe not going to be the thing that future proofs your career, but designing the right system whereby the right JavaScript function in the right context gets made every time, that is still like a really interesting software engineering problem. And then likewise, thinking about how people want to consume or visualize or think about the thing that you're making. I think there's this presumption with AI that like the ecosystem or the output is static, right? Like if we're just using AI to make the apps and products and websites that we've been consuming for the past 25 years, then like, yeah, that's kind of a bleak future. But there's so much more we can do because we're AI enabled that like raises the bar around experience, raises the bar around design, raises the bar around like what software engineering is capable of. Those are things that are amazing.
Right.
That I think is like that new frontier to go focus on. And you have to learn these skills, right? Like it's so important to know this stuff. But it's kind of liberating, right? Like I used to be a software engineer long time ago, and I would not call myself one today. But one of the really fun weekend projects that I did last weekend is I was like, I really need an office supplies ordering system because I keep forgetting to order soda water for the office, right? And so I pulled up Claude Code. Well, so first I pulled up Cowork and I was like, let me make a plan for like what it is that I want to do. And then I launched in Claude Code and said, all right, I want to open up the Amazon Marketplace. I want to create an API that allows me, or like leverage an API that allows me to place orders. I want to have a Slack bot that is constantly monitoring this particular channel, that is deduping and understanding what orders come by. I want to create an MCP server for that so that I can actually get like order summaries and do order approval workflows. And then twice a week on Tuesday and Friday at 9 a.m., it aggregates all the stuff in the Slack channel and says, here's your Amazon order. And I was able to write that as like more or less a non-software engineer because I understand good software engineering principles, and I had a problem that I knew how to articulate in a way that a system could go and solve.
Right.
That's the thing that we need to be indexing for.
Right. I actually Jim just convinced me to get Claude Cowork. And so I'm not there yet. I'm still going up a little bit of the learning curve, but I'm
Well, I
looking
mean,
forward to it.
I was playing around with a virtual assistant idea for her, because she's got multiple emails, accounts, and all this stuff. And as I looked at the idea of the virtual assistant, I was like, I can create a lot of this myself, or I can just get her to use Claude Cowork and do a lot of it. And there's a lot of discussions that can be had about privacy and security and, doing things safely and all that stuff, secure, even using MCP servers, like you mentioned. And one of the things that concerns me when we talk to this group of students tomorrow, assuming there's any computer science majors, especially in the audience, is my ability to articulate a problem clearly that allows it to be created into either a workflow process or in product comes from 40 years of experience. And I have a degree in software engineering. I spent many years doing software engineering as well. But when you just started out, I mean, a guy, my mentor at the time, told me his goal for most software engineers right out of college is if they don't run into the walls after a couple of weeks, then he's made progress teaching them. I mean, there was this incremental process, and he was kind of the epitome of the end of that process because he was a software architect. And that software architect was considered to be where you got to, because now you understand system levels all the way down to writing it. The question you have to ask yourself is, or ask you is, if you're going to hire somebody, are you going to hire a new hire, or are you going to hire somebody with 20 years of experience for your company that you feel like can architect solutions with you and your customers? How are you going to look at a new hire?
Well, I think we're in this like really interesting place right now where there is this transition, and the transition is very much in progress. And so I kind of take it from two ways, right? Like, first, every business and every company has to get either comfortable or decide how comfortable they're going to be with engineers that are writing code that they do not necessarily understand themselves. And I mean, they'll understand the concepts, right? But the actual implementation, for example, I know what an MCP server is. I've never written one until this weekend. And if I were to look at the code, I could probably follow along with it. But I've also like never written one from scratch, right? And so you're going to end up with a lot more of that, where you have people that are entering the workforce that are going to be expected to make things that they don't understand at a very fundamental level how they work. And I think that's okay, because throughout all of human history, we've all stood on the shoulders of giants. I don't exactly know how to make an engine, but I still drive a car. So there's a lot of these things that we have to get kind of okay with, or decide how okay we are with being unaware of some of the fundamentals that are powering the things that we're building.
Well, like you just made a comment about the Amazon order. The first thing that popped into my mind is that I'm assuming that he's not having it actually place the order for him. So you're looking at it and then you're the one that's saying place order. Is that correct? Or are you allowing the AI to do that for you?
The AI places the order, but it places the order after an approval step inside of
Okay.
Slack. And so it aggregates all that stuff, goes out to the order API, fills up a shopping cart, sends that shopping cart back and says, does everything look good here? And there's like some control limits I built into it. And right now it's in a sandbox, so it's not actually in production. But like, I'm planning on taking it to production after a little bit more testing, with
Right.
the intent of saying, like, I don't entirely know how this app is made, but the outputs of that app are valid. They pass testing. They do all the things that we need it to do, and it fully functions, right? And so
See, that's
that's
kind of what I see. Sorry, but that's kind of what I see when it comes to like the new CS people entering in the workforce. I mean, for a long time, I mean, Jim and possibly you, whenever y'all first entered in the workforce, you tended to have a mentor. You tended to have somebody that like, here's your senior engineer. You were in a group, and y'all all work together. But the person that was like basically making sure the actual project got done was the project manager, the senior engineer. I see a lot of it being, okay, here's all these CS guys. Now their team is an AI. But then before that gets released into a company, I hope that we just still have that senior engineer or somebody who actually knows before it gets like the button gets pushed for that to be published.
yeah. I mean, there's a lot of risk with the idea of not totally understanding everything about it, right? Like, look, I don't exactly know how my car's engine works, but somebody does.
Right,
And so like
right.
that somebody does is going to be around for a while. Like, I
Hmm.
don't see us like completely, shunning the idea that somebody has to know, right? And maybe as we see like AI tools now writing compilers and stuff like that, we're getting into a place where we may have AI that has its own coding languages that are more efficient than natural language processing. But that's still going to happen in the area of either very low level things or things that actually happen at like LLM companies for a while before that makes it out into the public purview.
One
Hmm.
of the things that Maury and I have mentioned several times to people is that every time technology grows, there's an abstraction layer that gets put on top of what's underneath. I mean, when I started writing code, I was writing machine level code. You put languages on top of that and languages. I mean, I could argue that right now, if you created a code and program in Python that took 90 lines of code, there's 4,000 lines of libraries code underneath that you have no idea how it works.
Yeah, I mean, I started out writing Winamp plugins in assembly, so you could do like cool visualizations to audio. And so, like, I
Hmm.
hear you. Like, you would never do that today.
So, but your product, back to your product, because it's what you obviously here to talk about. Um, it sounds like that you're really, when I first looked at it, I thought maybe what you were doing was kind of creating a workflow and then injecting human in the loop in places that you felt that the product felt was valuable. And it sounds like that maybe you're doing that, or maybe the AI is being injected in places to make evaluations, like sort of like the agentic kind of view where you have an agent that's your security agent, you have an agent that's your coding agent, you have an agent that checks your agents, and a managing agent. Would you say that your product is more like an agentic type thing, or is it something different that I'm not understanding?
Yeah, so we're like a semantic layer to your context, and then to use a very like academic viewpoint attached to it, and then we also have these moments inside of our control plane that say like, here's the valuable data to surface, and here's where you should pause for a person. And so those are kind of like the two ways that we do it. So the first is like we gather up all that context, we wrap it in structured data, we give it some idea of like how we should weight and think about that data based on different tool calls that are happening inside of the system. And then the second thing we do is we say like, all right, like there are moments in this process where if you have a conflict between red and blue, it probably makes more sense for us to ask a person than to proceed with like some presumptive answer. And so that would be kind of like the two ways that we think about it. Is the first is like, how do we gather, aggregate, and normalize all these different data sources? How do we weight them differently based on the types of things that we're asking an LLM or an agent to do? And then the second part of it is like, when we are faced with a decision, what is the risk level or risk tolerance for that decision? And if that risk is really high, how do we surface that to a human and also surface the data that helps them make that decision?
Sounds like there's an awful lot of points in there that sound very much like human level decisions. But obviously, your company's not going to scale if there's too many humans involved in the process. So, do you work out these decision flows with the customer of your product, or
Yeah,
is
so we
this
have a
built into
forward
the product?
so we have a forward deployed team, and that forward deployed team is there basically to talk about what are the workflows you have? How do we implement AI and Knapsack in those product workflows to help bring you into the world of agents helping you build your product? And doing that in really meaningful ways, like having an agent that could conceivably ship something to production the same day that you think or scope that idea. And so we have this motto called "Think It, Ship It," where if you look right now, like the way you make a product in a modern context is pretty convoluted, right? Like you have a some sort of research process that says like, hey, here's the feature I need to build, or here's the problem I'm trying to solve. You have a UX process where you conceive of like, what does the design of like that look like? What are the user flows? What are the pathways through it? And then you say like, okay, like let's go translate that into whatever the artifact is that represents a unit of work for engineering, be that a user story or a ticket or something like that. And then people go and they make a bunch of stuff in code, and that shows up as pull requests in a repository. That ultimately then gets shipped usually to some sort of CI or QA process, probably both. And then ultimately, eventually, you get a release that shows up in front of a user. But that's a lot of steps, and it's a big tool chain that gets you there, right? And the idea is with Knapsack, you really shorten that tool chain. So if I'm an engineer, if I'm a designer, if I'm a product person, heck, if I'm a salesperson that has a particular product need, I should be able to ask for how I can solve that product need and be able to do all those steps to take it up to the line of like, this is ready to go. And then ultimately, like a human should always look at the thing that you make and say, like, is this actually ready to go? But you should be able to do all of the things that you need to ship a product that's on brand, performant, aligned with your code base, aligned with your code standards, and ultimately represents like user value. And you shouldn't have to feel like it is a giant difference between the person that thinks of that idea and the user that consumes that idea.
Sounds like time to market is going to be cut major.
Yeah, that's our core value, right? Is like, the idea of why does it take an enterprise a year to ship a brochureware site? Well, it's
Hmm.
because it's a complicated process with a lot of handoffs. Why does it take us 2 weeks to prototype a new feature, but 20 months to get it in app? Well, it's because it's a very convoluted process. And our intention is to try to take that and look at that really wandery, distorted tool chain and then shorten it and draw a much more direct line between the person that thinks of a concept, a problem, or a feature and the ability to ship it.
My mentor used to tell me a story when he was working with his mentor in a very large corporation, like you were talking about earlier, and he went into his first meeting with the guy to talk about a product that they had already been working on, but they hadn't really done much. They had a product supposed spec, they hadn't done much. So in the meeting, and they sat down, and the marketing team came in. And they go, we're gonna have to make some changes. And the guy's like, well, there goes everything. We're gonna throw out everything we've done because you made these changes. In reality, they went back to the office, and my mentor goes, I haven't really done anything. He goes, I know, but they always change their mind on the first iteration of it anyway. So we don't do anything until they come to us with the second iteration, because then they've actually put some thought into it. So when you talk about that longer process for getting things out the door, people know what they hate. They just don't know what they like. So if you don't give them something to throw darts at, then you're going to come up with something that probably isn't. It's that classic, tire swing cartoon that everybody's probably seen, where what the customer wants, engineering designs, all that other stuff. With it ended up supposedly a tire swing, but it was 15 variations that were completely wrong. So when you talk about your product stack, do you feel like that you help make that less likely to happen? I mean, Maurie mentioned a second ago going faster. You can ship faster and still ship crap. So the
Totally.
question is, are you helping them not ship crap? Or are you just helping them? Theoretically, I guess you are, because you're aggregating all these data sources, as you said. And then are you going all the way up to deployment is the second part of that question. In other words, do you help? Because deployment is the hard part for me. That's not my area of expertise.
Yeah. So one of our customers still owns their deployment chain, right? And so like what it goes to say like, hey, this is working code to this is in front of a user. That deployment is still owned by that customer. But we can also take data from that deployment or data from the use of that new feature and use that as feedback into the product. And so that's where you kind of get the crap tolerance figured out,
Mhm.
right? Is this idea of like, are you creating user value? Because that's ultimately what we're all out there to do, is to try to
Hopefully.
figure out how we create value. And so whatever that measure is of value, like look, AI can help you just define what those measures of value are, but ultimately that's still a pretty human decision to say like
Mhm.
what actually creates value for these customers. And it can be stuff that's easily measurable, like dollars through a shopping cart, or it could be things that are much more intangible, like time on site, or did somebody thumbs up or thumbs down that experience.
Mhm.
And so that idea of like defining user value becomes a really, really clear need within UX for humans. And I think that likewise, trying to understand exactly how you go from that thing that I created in an AI assisted, agentic assisted way to actually being able to connect that to that value. That's still like a very core software engineering principle that I don't think goes away in this. But in terms of like, how do you make sure you don't ship crap? Like, there is a bit of a garbage in, garbage out problem
Mhm.
to these systems, right? And that's getting better, but it's still really present. That if you don't have good systems and you don't have systems concepts that are embedded in your organization right now, you're probably not ready for AI assisted coding. You need to have a way of structuring the inputs into AI that allow it to be really good robot food. And if it's not good.
You just described about 90% of the corporations on the planet, by the way, with the "I'm not ready" problem.
Yeah. No, and I mean, this is why forward deployed engineering is still like essential to solving this problem. And, if you're not familiar, like forward deployed engineering basically is like the rebranding of CSCX. And what it does is it says like, here's a highly technical person that is also competent with the use of AI, that also understands business processes. And we're going to put that person inside your organization alongside our software. And they're going to make it so that their entire focus is about how do you adopt this tool in a way that's driving value in that company. And so that forward deployed model is taking a company that may not be 100% ready for AI because they don't understand their systems, they don't understand how to use it, they don't have systems, and either building or readying those systems to be good AI food. And then showing people how they have like a leash on their AI pet. Where are
Mhm.
those human moments of intervention? What are the things that we need to surface during those moments of intervention? Those are kind of the two concepts that we really work with inside of big enterprise companies to say, this is how you get ready. And there's a whole like maturity and readiness assessment attached to this that we do that helps organizations understand where they fall relative to their peers and whether or not they're ready to actually embrace that capability.
Awesome. Very interesting conversation, by the way. We are out of time, so
Hold
we're
on,
going to
I
have.
gotta ask.
Oh, okay, hang on.
So Maury said we're going to a college tomorrow. We're talking to professors, associate professors, and students.
Mhm.
One piece of advice, short piece of advice. What are you gonna tell them if you're standing up there with us? Because what they want to know, we're talking literally about opportunity versus efficiency AI. And what's the opportunity? What do we tell them?
Yeah. So, I mean, I have a very optimistic worldview on this, and I think that it's important to think about that, right? I kind of think about the future as the jobs that exist in software engineering and design today are not necessarily the jobs of tomorrow. And there are a lot of skills that are pervasive across, the jobs of today and the jobs of tomorrow. But the big thing to think about is like, what does an AI enable us to do that we've never been able to do before? And how do you go do those things? How do I go create a hyper personalized application so that Maurie, Jim, and Chris can all go to the same URL in a web browser and have three very fundamentally different experiences that are perfectly tailored for us? Um, how can we solve accessibility, not just on like a screen reader side of things or an assistive technology side of things? How can we look at accessibility as like one of the things that is just baked into the way that we work? There's all of these frontiers around compliance, around experience, around brand that are very unsolved problems, that are very interesting problems. I mean, if I had $1 million to put in a startup right now, I would be trying to figure out who is the person that can figure out how to represent a brand inside of an agent. Because Nike is not going to abide the idea of like people are using agents to buy shoes and they never actually see a swoosh when they do it. And so there's all sorts of these new frontiers that we have not conquered or tackled or even really thought of. And so that embracing of that is going to open up all these opportunities and all these doors into new jobs and new ways of working that are arguably more exciting than designing or coding another version of a button.
Right. I agree.
Did a good job on our presentation because that was good.
That we actually talked about that.
I think
quite a bit.
we're in agreement with you.
We
So,
appreciate
nice.
the fact that you just made us feel better about what we're talking
I'm
about.
here to
Maury was
validate
worried
you.
about it. Maury, you validated Maury's presentation.
Absolutely.
So, good
So,
deal.
all right, guys. My name is Maury. This is my husband, Jim. Thank you all so much for watching AI in Action. Chris, thank you so much for being
Of course.
here.
Thank you.
We hope that you guys have a marvelous rest of the week.